Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective through redefined content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter. Hey everyone, this is Jonathan Hansen, Chief Creative Officer at Unconquered and your host of Conquer the Noise. Today we have a great show. We have Derrick Emsley, co-founder of Tentree. I just want to give you a heads up, this is a pre-recorded conversation, and first off I want to say I really enjoyed it. I think Derrick is doing some really innovative thinking, and Tentree is way ahead of the curve in their approach to building fandom, impact, and the customer experience. Derrick describes the company as a tree planting company that is supported through the sale of sustainably made clothing. But after digging into the business a little bit with Derrick, I'd almost add that they are also a tech company and that they have developed their own technology through Tree in order to help create transparency, accountability, while also empowering other partner brands to lead their own tree planting initiatives. So here's my conversation with Derrick. Derrick, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Really appreciate you guys having me.
Of course. So where are you calling from? I see you have snowshoes on the background on the wall. It looks like it's probably a nature inspired location. Or where are you these days?
Yeah. I'm kind of back and forth between Vancouver and Whistler. Right now I'm in Whistler, but yeah, we're sort of up in the northwest here, and we're super lucky. We steps from mountains and skiing and ocean and all that.
I love Whistler. I love Vancouver. I've had the opportunity to travel there quite a bit. Never in like the winter. I never really saw Whistler Mountain in its full snow glory, but spent some time hiking and ATVing in the mountains there, and it's so beautiful. Was that a deliberate decision to move your brand to such a location as so, I guess you could say, ingrained in this outdoor nature lifestyle?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we started our business in Saskatchewan, which is where I'm originally from, sort of in the prairies. And, one was that it was relatively insulated from the rest of sort of the apparel and frankly, environmental space. So it was challenging sometimes to attract talent. But the other side of it was we really wanted to position the business in an area that really represented the brand and the culture we were trying to create. And there's this quote, I want to say it's David Attenborough, but I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's basically this idea that nobody protects what they don't care about, and they don't care about what they haven't experienced. And so for us, our perspective has always been protect the world you play in. And so really like positioning the business where we can, attract people to what we're doing that, live a certain lifestyle and really enjoy the outdoors and getting outside. It was super important to us.
So Tentree, it doesn't come up to me as necessarily an outdoor brand. So how do you describe your brand to folks?
Yeah, I think we've gone through an evolution as a brand, to be honest. And I think it comes from the fact that when we founded it, we weren't apparel people. We didn't come in with this incredible vision of this is the apparel that we want to create. We don't really think of ourselves as an apparel brand that plants trees. We think of ourselves as a tree planting company that sells apparel. And so I think for us, the approach has really been about creating the product that reflects that vision and those values. And so we like to think of ourselves as an outdoor lifestyle company. I would say a bit heavier on the lifestyle than the outdoor side of that equation. But for us, it's about making sure that the product is rooted in nature. And whether it's like a hike or something like that, you can wear it sort of on the patio or out in the woods. But, we're definitely not your hardcore backcountry brand by any stretch.
So, I mean, as an apparel brand, I know you've hinted earlier that you've sort of gone through an evolution, and as I dug in, I kind of read through some of that, how that has manifested. But in the beginning, you were really kind of, and that makes sense now thinking back on what you just said, thinking back on your early beginning, where you were basically using American Apparel t-shirts, printing logos, and then supporting the tree side of the business, I guess you could say. So that makes sense in the bigger context of being a planting tree business first, and with the apparel brand on, I'd say, second. How has that evolved? Because it sounds like now, as I spent some time on your site, it looks like there's more of a thoughtful approach. Not that there wasn't there before, but on how sustainability goes through the entire business, not necessarily just through planting trees. And now you're actually controlling your own supply chain, making your own products, have your own manufacturing facilities. So I'm curious to, what led to those decisions? What were you seeing within, just like, was it impact reports, or how did you get to that place?
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten it wrong as many times as we've gotten it right. And we've kind of stumbled through a lot of these decisions. I think for us, you alluded to it, but we really started this business to plant trees. My background when I was in high school was we had a tree farm that we created to plant trees with the idea of selling carbon offsets. So really, Tentree was a idea to basically take this, this concept of planting trees, but try to create a more sustainable business model around it, try to create a better funding vehicle ultimately. But our goal at the end of the day was always to plant trees and create a product and most importantly, a consumer facing brand that connected people to that impact. Because we had this experience that showed us the impact tree planting can have. But what we didn't have through our old tree farm approach was a funding vehicle that could really grow and scale. So the idea behind Tentree was, well, how can we create a business that allows us to create thousands and thousands and thousands of tree farms? And so for us, the idea was, well, let's start with a t-shirt. And this was really early days. This was back in 2012. And it was really around that time when people were starting to, like the Tom shoes of the world and things like that, were starting to become popular. And when you looked at all the environmental initiatives that were out there, frankly, they didn't really have that same sort of emotional resonance. It was kind of like organic cotton, recycled polyester. But frankly, these like initiatives lacked a lot of tangibility. It was really hard to tell what was greenwashing and what wasn't. There was still a lot of, frankly, consumer education that probably needed to happen. And so for us, our background was tree planting. And we thought, well, maybe we can take this idea of consumers starting to frankly lead their purchase decisions with values a little bit more, with really like their sort of values around things like sustainability and that, and attach it to what we know, which is tree planting. But what you said, which is right, is like we didn't know anything about apparel when we started. We bought American Apparel t-shirts, we put logos on them, and we sold them to our friends and family, and eventually we had a couple people that weren't connected to our moms or dads that bought a t-shirt. And I think what we realized is that continued to grow outward, like, degrees of separation from us. We had people that were very aligned with what we were trying to do with tree planting, but they started to challenge us on this idea of like, well, why aren't you making your product sustainably? And frankly, our answer to that was like, what do you mean? Like, what does that mean to make a product sustainably? And they said, well, use organics, use recycled products, like think about your supply chain and the dyes. And this was admittedly just something that we didn't have experience in. And so we were really fortunate that we had amazing people around us that were willing to support and help guide us a little on this journey. And so what we did was over the course of about 18 months, we totally overhauled our entire supply chain. And we went from effectively no sustainable materials, and this was probably about 2 years into the business, to effectively about 95%. And I would say today we're probably, I'll never say we're 100% because there's always areas that we're trying to improve. And I think there's still things within our product that we're still trying to figure out exactly what is the best material. But I'd say we're as close as we can be at this stage. We're about 99% sustainable alternatives, ethical manufacturing, and that sort of thing. And so for us, it was just about living into our mission, because at the end of the day, we want to plant trees. And the vehicle that we have chosen to allow us to do that is a product, which, in this whole culture and conversation around consumerism, the more our product gets consumed, the more impact we have. And so, we kind of live in this fallible space of understanding, okay, if that product is the vehicle to create impact, how can we make sure that product has as little negative impact as possible, so that the tree's positive impact is even greater? Because if at the end of the day, the product has a negative impact and the trees have a positive, like, is it just net neutral?
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it's been about reduction of our impact, of our negative impact through using more sustainable fabrics. And it's been about really trying to negate any negative impact that we can't reduce by things like offsetting and incorporating that into our model.
And you mentioned like your response to that. There's a question around why aren't your products sustainably made, and you sort of answered, what does that mean? And I still think there's a big disconnect for people, the average consumer, of knowing what sustainably made means. There's so many different like claims being thrown at them all the time on labels or in commercials or whatever. Sustainability has been one of those, I think, phrases that's just gotten blanketed across any sort of green, eco-friendly product without really diving into the specifics. Are you finding that a challenge yourself? And how are you, I guess, informing your customers that what sustainability means for you in particular?
Yeah, to me, it's all about the story you're trying to tell. And for us, it's about weaving this sort of like journey, this narrative journey that we've gone on. And I mean, the reality is that we by no means claim to be perfect in any of this. We still have room for improvement. We're still learning as we go. But at the end of the day, for us, our approach has been to be open and transparent with our supporters and make sure that they're actually engaged in that journey. Here's how we're improving. Here are the goals we're setting. Here's that sort of thing. But I think you bring up a really important point, which is that it's getting noisier and noisier. And particularly as you see larger organizations step into it that, frankly, can't overhaul their entire supply chain overnight. And they're claiming their sustainability off of 5% of the material being sustainable. And that's their sort of sustainable arm of their business. It definitely becomes more convoluted. And I think the reality is, like with anything in sustainability, we're in a transition. 5 years from now, as people work their way to a entirely sustainable strategy, our hope is that we will be onto the next conversation. It's not just about sustainable materials, then it's about end of life and circularity and things like that, and really continuing to sort of lead those conversations and really just making sure that our customers are along for that journey.
So, we talked a little bit about materials and manufacturing, and just from the consumer standpoint myself, of someone who tries to buy I guess you could say ethically produced products. Is there a difference between organic cotton and recycled materials as far as, is one better for the earth than the other?
It's a really it's probably not a short answer.
Of course, no. I don't think any of these answers really are going to be are short or easy. So I totally feel you there.
But I think at the end of the day, you got to start from the point of, okay, what are the material is cotton in this scenario that you created. So, okay, the next step is trying to say, okay, how can we continue to improve step after step after step? So if you're starting with cotton, then the logical next step is organic. And a lot of people actually will talk about some of the challenges that come with organic cotton that maybe has a standard attached to it, but is made in a country that doesn't actually, manage their water resources effectively, is actually not as sustainable as, regular conventional cotton in an area that manages those resources more effectively. So there's a lot of frankly nuance to this discussion, but I think it ultimately comes down to really what resources are you managing for? So there's things like pesticide usage, there's things like water conservation usage and things like that. And each one of those products has, I would say trade-offs associated with it. So organic cotton is likely a lot better from a pesticide standpoint, whereas recycled cotton is frankly likely significantly better from a water consumption standpoint, because it's a second use of it. And so you don't need to actually grow the fiber again. So, but then there's also the back end to this of like collecting the material and the total supply chain associated with it. So I think The short answer is there's not a clear one is better than the other answer. And everything about this is that it's a transition towards getting the entire industry to a better starting point. And each of these is kind of a response to, one of these resource considerations that you have to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're very much of the mindset of progress over perfection. We say it a lot on the podcast, just because I think, just as you've said, it's an evolution, and it's not black and white. There's a lot of other things that are to be considered, and always are changing. I think just depending on the objectives of the business and where the culture and as we've seen, like supply chain this year or over last year has really changed significantly. I would love to hear about how you're reinvesting in the communities. I mean, I don't think you're just planting trees. Right now you're planting roughly 10 trees per item purchased. But there's more that goes into it, because then you have to actually activate on that and get people out in the world planting these things. And or if they start from seedlings, getting these trees to a point of where they can be planted from a harvesting standpoint. So could you walk me through a little bit of what it's like once someone purchases something, how the dominoes fall thereafter?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the like with any answer, there's the short and the long version, I'd say. But I think for us, the process for us to plant trees actually goes back to when I was in high school and we created this tree planting organization, because it got us connected with this global community of planting organizations. That what we saw from their standpoint was that they couldn't necessarily grow and scale their messaging and their impact, but they were doing incredible things. And so for us, the creation of Tentree was really this idea of like, how can we create this business model that really helps us support these global projects and really work in an impactful and meaningful way with them. So we work incredibly closely with planting partners all across the globe. I think to date, we've worked with over 30 or 40 different planting organizations that have a variety of different approaches. Everything from agroforestry, which is all about planting fruit trees, getting people out of unsustainable farming, into sort of mangrove reforestation, supporting ecosystem rehabilitation, planting avocado trees in Haiti to support soil stabilization and prevent erosion or landslides, and planting in areas hit by wildfire in North America. So every project's dramatically different. But what it comes down to is, what's beautiful about sort of the Tentree approach is that we've created this business that we can sort of see continuing to grow, and that we manage in a very sort of thoughtful, process-driven approach, so that every year we can go into it and say, here's the estimated number of trees we're going to plant. So this year, for instance, we're expecting to plant about 25 million trees through Tentree. And so, and you alluded to it, yes, we plant 10 trees for every item of clothing that we sell. And so what we do is we work with those partners to identify the locations. We work with them, we visit the projects, and really every project has to meet three criteria. One is there has to be a really impactful environmental impact. That can be, ecosystem rehabilitation, helping animals and habitat, that sort of thing. There has to be a meaningful social component. And so, for instance, in Madagascar, it's about job creation. In Senegal, it's about small leasehold farmer protection. And then in addition to that, the third is that we have to be able to visit the sites, we have to be able to audit the impact, and we have to be able to continue to monitor it so that we can communicate that impact back to our supporters. And so, for us, it's a lot of pre-work that goes into it, and it requires a much more thoughtful approach to things like forecasting and our long-term consumer narrative, because we're planning a planting project in Tanzania at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro, and we want to make sure that weaves back into our product at some point too, and those stories to tell. So it's a fairly involved process.
Well, I think accountability and impact's a huge part of what I see you all doing very well, and not to discredit all the other work, but I think a lot of brands struggle with the impact part and transparency aspect of it, and that's one thing I think you're really excelling at. What was born out of that is a program called Veritree that you worked on a little bit. I would love for you to sort of give our listeners a context of what Veritree is and how that funnels into your idea of impact and transparency.
Yeah. We're really proud of what we built at Veritree. And I think to your point, it really just shows where we came from, which is tree planters first, effectively. The way I think about our approach over the last decade has been to find points of leverage around impact. We started a tree farm that planted 150,000 trees. The idea behind Tentree was to create thousands and thousands of tree farms. The idea behind Veritree for us is really, how can we now create thousands and thousands of Tentrees? One of the things that we noticed over the last 3 to 5 years especially is there's a lot of people that have stepped into this space to support tree planting, and it's great. It's really exciting to see. But to the point you made before, a lot of these other organizations don't necessarily know how to approach these projects from the same level of diligence that we do. And so what we were seeing is that we've had, and our planting partners have told us this, is that there's over 1,000 companies that have approached our variety of planting partners and said, I saw Tentree doing this with you. I'd like to do something similar. And, they're effectively counting on us at Tentree to have done the diligence, which, so is our customer. So we need to be doing this anyway. And the worst thing that would happen is 10 years from now, we are all talking about all the trees we planted, only to find out that none of that impact or none of that work had a real long-term impact. So really, it was about 3 years ago that internally we started recognizing that this could be a significant problem if it wasn't addressed. And not one of the planting organizations we partnered with actually had the ability to really communicate the work from the ground in a way that gave us the confidence of no double counting, true additionality, permanence, and a handful of other things that are frankly really hard to show within nature-based solutions. And so for us, the idea was, how can we maybe have the resources and the technological expertise to support this problem with fixing this problem. And so that's where Veritree was sort of birthed. It came out of us having this need to audit our own planting efforts. And what it became was this tool and this sort of software that has now brought in, frankly, many other businesses that have decided that they want to support planting, but they want to do it in a way that's verifiable and auditable. So what Veritree is what we call an integrated planting management platform. So we can create our planting sites within the tool, map out the polygons in the areas, estimate the densities of the planting, whether it's mangrove or dry deciduous. And then our collection application allows us to push that information down to the ground level, where individuals, whether they're in rural Madagascar, low internet environment, low literacy environment sometimes, are able to collect all the data to support the tree planting, everything from survivability to the number of trees planted, to the date, time, GPS location. And then we're able to audit and verify that work that's being done. And we're able to identify inconsistencies and things like that. And then what Veritree is able to do is it's able to, once those trees or those sort of field updates get verified, it's able to take those individual trees and effectively codify them or turn them into, what we kind of consider tree tokens. And then those trees can be allocated to partners, in this case, Tentree. And, what we can then do is see all the info down to the ground level of the work that we've supported. And what we're able to do is know those trees are not being allocated to other people. We're able to continue using things like geospatial and satellite imagery, continue to monitor the impact from the ground, things like survivability and stuff like that. Because, when you look at the world of nature-based solutions, the vast majority of tech is really focused on satellite imagery.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that for the first 5 years of tree planting projects, satellite, maybe 3 years, we'll say, satellite imagery actually has a lot, like we haven't solved a lot of the problems for it to be actually functional. And so our approach has been to start with ground truth and really layer in the satellite and geospatial support over top of that for additional context. And so we built this platform using blockchain technology, and it's been a really incredible kind of response to it already. We've brought on groups like Samsung and launched a tree planting credit card and a handful of other things with the idea of how can we create thousands of Tentrees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is this where I saw on as part of the consumer experience, when people buy from you, they are able to, I guess, see where their trees are planted or have a registry to them. Is that registry, was that born out of Veritree, or is it the registry started first and you were looking for a way to connect it and make it more of a proof is in the pudding type aspect?
It was a bit of both. So what we did was we started with the registry with the idea of like, how can we make this more tangible for the customer?
Yeah.
We put a code on every product to say, here's where your tree is planted. But then as we dug deeper and deeper and deeper into that project, we again started realizing some of the inconsistencies with our own reporting and some of the need for better transparency, which led us as well in part to creating Veritree. And now what we've evolved that tree registry program into is what we're calling your impact wallet. So you're able to see all of your sort of Veritree verified trees that have been supported through your purchases at Tentree and long-term through, the family of Veritree brands. Because for us, the approach is how can we make sure that we accelerate the adoption of reforestation globally? How can we make sure that we're doing it in a verifiable way, which to us was the biggest gap in the entire global reforestation space right now.
I agree 100%. And I think, I see a lot of cynicism from consumers and buyers around green initiatives, either not trusting what brands are saying, not understanding what sustainability means to them. And I'm curious, is this part of that a marketing strategy in some ways, building out a story to help combat some of that cynicism? Because what I love about the messaging that I have seen is that it's really empowering towards the people who are buying things. Not necessarily, Tentree as a business that helps empower you to make the things you're doing count. And here's how your purchase is impacting the betterment. And I think that's like a really powerful, I guess, message. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, has this been a part of the marketing strategy from day one? Has this been evolving? So I think it's a really smart and authentic. I hate to use that word, as it's such a buzzword in marketing, but yeah, it feels true to what you all are after.
I believe so. I think, you use the word evolution, which I 100% agree with, because by no means, as much as, when you get the nice, beautiful press release, magazine article that tells this really like coherent narrative, it makes it sound like, when you were a toddler, you had this vision of your ultimate like outcome. That was not the case. I think for us, it's absolutely been an evolution. I think the theme or the thread that is pulled through all of it is trees for us, and acceleration of the impact of tree planting. So I think, yes, have we faced cynicism? 100%. And is this a way of us hopefully combating that in some way? 100%. I think for us, our belief is that at the end of the day, the consumer, and we want the consumer to have a relationship with their trees. And right now, Tentree is the vehicle for that. But at the end of the day, Tentree is not the person that is planting those trees. It's the consumer that is supporting that. And, we want them to connect that to their t-shirt or their hoodie or their hat and hopefully support more and more tree planting. But at the end of the day, we want to inspire people to believe in their ability to have an impact. And to us, trees are the most tangible, emotionally sort of resonant environmental impact out there. And so if we can use that as a vehicle and use that as a motivator, then, it could potentially have orders of magnitude greater impact down the line than Tentree on its own.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to how you're building fandom around the brand. Speak as we sort of start talking a little bit about the marketing. It seems like you have a super strong following on social media, over 2 million followers, just on Instagram alone. One of your Instagram posts I read was one of the most liked Instagram posts ever, one of the top 10, and I think it's may even still hold on that list. So there's a real sense of support from the public, and I'm curious to how the brand's been able to grow that and really create sort of that fandom where people keep coming back.
Yeah, I think we've been fortunate, like from a timing standpoint. The broader conversation on sustainability is definitely happening, and we're fortunate to be a brand that I think is part of that broader conversation. So I think there's to some extent an element of just rising tides lifting all boats. So I think then the question becomes, okay, how do we stand out within that space? And I think for us, we've always focused on a few things. One is tangibility. And really that just goes back to the trees and being, to your point, it's a bit of a buzzword, but authentic to that. Like we exist to plant trees, and really and really then thinking about how that layers through every piece of our business from a holistic environmental impact standpoint. So really it's, it's tangibility. Our communication is what we try to think of ourselves as is, we're not alarmists, we're realists. We're not finger pointing or giving you guilt. We're trying to empower. And I think that approach is also, while it's definitely become a more normalized approach to sustainability. I think 10 years ago, 5 years ago, there was a lot more of this like green guilt around environmentalism. And I think really it's now we're realizing that empowerment is the right approach to this narrative. And then, the third thing is really just fallibility. We believe in creating a brand that, one doesn't take itself too seriously. We're dealing with big issues, but at the end of the day, we kind of want to meet our supporters where they are, get them empowered, really like live into our evolution, our journey as a brand, and bring them along with that story. And I think the post that you mentioned is a really great example. That was our Double Tapped Plant campaign, which got over 15 million likes. And at the time was, I think, the third most liked post ever. And that was something that we didn't put a penny of marketing behind. It just went viral because we have such an incredible group of consumers and influencers and supporters and brand ambassadors that just believe in this message of empowering environmentalism, this idea of like, okay, we're all in this together, and how can we collectively have an impact?
Yeah, I think I know you're saying other brands do the empowerment, and I do agree, but I don't think a lot of them do it as well as you. I think a lot of times the empowerment message is left at buy this product that's been recycled from water bottles, and then the relationship kind of ends. There's no ability to go back and see the impact that purchase made. There's no ability to connect in some sort of digital way with the community that it's supporting and so forth. And they don't really go beyond other than just buy this product. So I think if anything, there's a good case study around what you guys are doing as far as how to empower customers to act like their purchases have actionable returns. You mentioned
Well,
no, please.
I just want to make a point there, because I think it is an important point. And I think what you're actually alluding to is what we sort of internally believe is this evolution we're going through of business models. Internally, we don't really call ourselves a sustainable brand, because to us, this idea of sustainability is just about doing less bad. It's like, okay, buy this pair of shoes and it is less bad than the alternative shoe. Buy this t-shirt, it's going to have less of a negative impact than this other shirt. And I think when you look at business models over the last, 5-10 decades, we've gone from this extractive mindset to this idea of a sustainable mindset. That sustainable mindset is sort of evolving into this idea of circular mindset. But again, these sustainable and circular mindsets really are functionally about doing less harm. And to us, the future of sustainability, whether that's the word to use or not, is about restorative business models. Business models that do as little bad as possible, but don't stop there. To us, the future of business isn't about doing less bad. It's about doing more good. And to us, that's really what we're advocating for as a business. What we're trying to showcase is possible. You can create a profitable, fast growing, resonant business with this approach to restoration rather than just sustainability.
I mean, you talked a little bit about your influencers and brand ambassadors, and I'm curious how that plays into the storytelling, into the idea of empowerment. Are you doing due diligence to make sure that they're living up to the brand standards? And I guess, how are you even finding these folks? Is it, and these are, I tend to ask questions with about 10 questions inserted into them. So feel free to just pick and choose as I'm rambling on. And the last part that I have around the brand ambassadors, I think there's always a conversation around like the micro, like working with people who have really strong communities following, a lot less people are maybe on their follower list, but really own a certain space, a certain voice. And then there's the idea that there's the big influencers, those with millions of followers who have, a little bit more breadth, maybe a little less focused. So I'm just curious within all those questions, how you're approaching big picture, how you're approaching ambassadors and influencers.
Yeah. I mean, there was a couple of questions in there. I think, you asked about diligence of ambassadors, and I think there's, to some extent, it can be challenging to really go to several levels deep. So I think you have to approach it with sort of a somewhat surface level kind of, evaluation process. And then really, as you start to see really who resonates with your community and who shares the values of the brand, then you're able to kind of go deeper and deeper and deeper. And really invest in those partnerships and those relationships that you really believe are very values aligned. I think for us, ambassadors has absolutely been an important part of our growth strategy. I think historically, we sort of went with what we would have called like macro or mega type ambassadors with, hundreds of thousands or millions of followers on their pages. I think what we've seen is that just with some of the changes in algorithms and things like that, particularly on Facebook's and Instagram channel, that isn't necessarily the highest return for us. And so really it's been about finding more sort of like community driven, like localized ambassadors that have maybe a smaller community, but a more engaged and sort of community that really trusting them. And then when you think of some of these larger ambassadors, it's really about like, who are those relationships that you really want to carry with you for a long time? Because, and I think that's to your point where you need to think long and hard about the sort of the values alignment of that partnership. Because if you're tying yourself as a brand, whether it be to, XYZ mega superstar like sports or, film or TV star, you're effectively endorsing them as they endorse you. And so being as a values driven brand, it's important that you think, critically about who you're sort of like, aligning your brand with.
And, this is a little bit of a departure from the ambassador question, but it revolves around just that idea of cultivating community. And something we've talked about a little bit on the site as far as the reward programs you offer and the ways for people to monitor their giving back. I'm curious how, or what, I guess you could say, unexpected learnings you've had from your rewards program, from watching the data, watching people come back to the brand, if there have been any, what those are as people engage with you.
Yeah, I mean, the most powerful metric we've identified is that when a customer registers a tree code with us, they are, I believe their lifetime value generally is about 70% higher than
Wow.
an individual that does not. And the other thing about the tree registry program that's incredibly important to us is that we're an omni-channel business. People are experiencing the brand in a retail store, like a wholesale REI, equipment, something like that, and they're also experiencing it online. And then in the years to come, we expect them to be experiencing it through our Tentree brick and mortar stores as well. And so, ensuring that they get a consistent experience, no matter where they're seeing the brand, is incredibly important to us because of how how much we want to create those emotional connections. And so that's where the tree registry program is so important. So, the reality is that a floor staff at a wholesaler that sells 100 other brands may not be as educated on the brand. You can't expect them to be. So how can we make sure that those individuals still have the opportunity at least to really understand the brand? And that's really where our tree registry program, we feel, is a core part of our growth strategy and our competitive differentiation.
Are you putting that stuff on tags for when people are in stores and let's say they see you on a rack or whatever, and it's the first time they've ever seen Tentree whatsoever, and they look at the tags or any sort of on product, I guess you could say communication, is that tree registry a part of that process or part of that?
It is.
Is okay.
Yeah. Historically, every product came with like a token with this laser etched code on it. And we found that it was, some people loved it. And then others were just kind of like tossing it. They'd like get the code and they toss it. And like, I have like 50 of them on my keychain. So I loved it. But I think the idea was great in theory, but we were probably creating more waste than benefit. And so now, it's still showcased all over our tags, but it's not a token. It's actually a QR code now that the customer can scan and immediately go into their impact wallet and see their trees get planted on their sort of personal island. They can see their impact grow, their carbon sequestration, the jobs they'll create, all that sort of stuff.
And you bring up the personal island, and I'm glad that you did. I think it's such a cool concept. What is the personal island? So when I was on there, it looks like this sort of digital world, and I'm curious if that was, thought of in advance before this whole idea of like the metaverse has been, getting more and more and more culturally relevant. The brand strikes me as a few steps ahead, just based on from where you started in high school. To where you are now, it seems like you guys have been able to sort of step ahead of the curve and be on trend before it's a trend, if you will.
Yeah, I think I won't sit here and try to claim that we knew the metaverse was going to be exactly what it was going to be. I think what we loved about the island example is it's fun and it's an experience, and the idea is that you connect a community. So you can see others' islands, you can visit them, you can see the impact other people are having. So I think it shares a lot of the fundamental ideas that sort of, support the metaverse. And what we've seen is that, like, for instance, with our partnership with Samsung, at their sort of very first metaverse store in Decentraland, there was actually they built out a forest, the Samsung forest, that you could walk through in their store. And so I think what we're seeing is that Veritree, the idea for it is to create this, effectively the plumbing for the entire restoration space. Do it in a way that is auditable, verifiable, tangible, and permanent, and make sure that the impact we say is happening is actually happening. And then through our API integrations and everything like that, we can really tap into any of these opportunities. And because these trees are effectively on the blockchain, they're tokenized, you can really connect them to the consumer in a really impactful way. So for us, you're kind of alluding to some of where we're really excited to take our impact wallet. Because whether, as we partner with groups like Samsung, as a consumer, you might have 10 trees from Tentree and 1 tree from Samsung. the idea is that like you want to see your whole impact pulled together, and you want to be able to see others' impact and sort of see, are you as an individual carbon neutral? Are you as an individual, having a positive impact on the planet through your purchases, and be able to share that sort of stuff. So the metaverse to us is a really interesting strategic long-term play.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's really smart. And then my last question here, we're running up on time. It's really around, I always ask people for, what they would give their younger self advice to their younger self. So same for you today. Do you have any advice that you'd give to your younger self as from, whether you were from when you were a kid all the way up through your high school experience to now? Younger self could be last week.
Yeah, probably. I think there was this quote I read a while back, and it was, I think it might have been Jeff Bezos, but he talked about how he treats every decision like a door, and a door is something you can open and walk through. It's also something you can walk back through. And it's less about the metaphor, but it's more about the way of thinking. And it's this idea of like treating decisions not always as life or death. And particularly as we're building our business, as we're thinking about when you're coming out of high school, university, and thinking about your career path, for us as a business, I think I've spent way too many sleepless nights building this business, losing sleep over decisions that a year later were insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Because at the end of the day, we know where our North Star is. We know what we're trying to build. We know that what we care about is planting trees. And if every day we come to work to try to accelerate that and bring that to life in an impactful way, we're going to continue heading in that direction. And I think, me included in this, we often take too much time and lose too much sleep, conflating or imagining that these decisions that we're making on a day-to-day basis are life or death. And I think as founders, as individuals in this sort of like always on world, we all need to, be able to take a breath and realize just take one step, like just make a decision, move forward, push ahead, and figure it out as you go.
Well, I think it's great advice. Derrick, thanks so much for joining us. I really enjoyed the conversation. Love what you all are doing at Tentree. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. I hope you're feeling inspired and having learned something new. Please head over to the Apple Podcast app and leave a review. See you all next week.